Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the sandals of a Roman citizen, or maybe a Roman criminal. Either way, you're not going to love where this ends up. Imagine it. The sun blazes down on white marble, crowds roar like a sea of thunder, and you're standing in the center of an arena, alone, barefoot, and very, very guilty. Somewhere behind a gate, something snarls. You don't know what it is yet, but the Roman crowd does. They've seen it before, and they love it. This is not a fight. There are no weapons in your hand. No armor, no shield, no training montage. You're here to be punished, and the audience is here to be entertained. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not a soldier, you're not a gladiator. You're just a guy who stole a loaf of bread or forged a will or said something bad about the emperor at a party. The punishment: damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This wasn't just some niche execution method. It was a crowd favorite during Rome's high imperial period. If you messed up and the right people got angry, you could find yourself part of the morning entertainment at the Colosseum. Yes, morning. Beasts and criminals warmed up the crowds before the gladiators came on. You stand in the middle of the arena, and somewhere in the dark tunnels, the animals are getting prodded into a rage. Lions, bears, leopards, even crocodiles. Sometimes you'd be chained up. Other times the Romans got creative, dressed you in a silly costume, or tied you to a cart, or smeared your body with animal fat. And the audience, laughing, cheering, placing bets. They brought their kids. It was a family outing. Look, little Marcus, that one's about to lose an arm. Historians still argue whether these executions were truly justice or mostly just spectacle. But let's be real, Rome loved turning punishment into performance. You might hope the animal finishes things quickly, but that's wishful thinking. Sometimes the beasts just weren't that hungry, or they were confused, or bored. So the executioners would poke them, lash them, or even starve them beforehand to make sure the show had enough drama. One quirky tidbit: sometimes the Romans would stage mythological punishments using real convicts. A guy might be tied to a post and attacked by a bear to recreate a scene from Hercules. You know, for authenticity. You're not just dying, you're playing a part. And when the lion finally lunges at you, there's no scream. You've already bitten your tongue, clenched your fists. You know what's coming. You just hope it ends fast. But maybe, just maybe, this particular lion isn't into you. And now you're lying there, bloodied but alive, and the crowd's booing. Not because they care about you, but because your punishment wasn't entertaining enough. So the guards come back out. They drag you across the sand. Maybe they toss in another beast, or maybe they just finish the job with a spear. Either way, there are no last words, just roars, dust, and silence. And tomorrow, someone else will take your place, because Rome doesn't rest, and it certainly doesn't forgive. You're awake again. This time you're not standing in an arena, you're folded, literally, curled into a ball, crammed into something tight, itchy, and disturbingly damp. A sack. A big, heavy leather sack tied tight with cords that cut into your ankles and wrists. But you're not alone in here. You shift. Something slithers across your leg. Something else squeals. Welcome to Ponacale, Rome's most surreal punishment for one particular crime: parricide, killing your own father. Romans considered the father the absolute core of the household, the paterfamilias, a walking deity in sandals. To murder him, that wasn't just crime, that was cosmic chaos. So naturally, the punishment had to be cosmic too. Not just death, symbolic, public, ritualistic death. The sack you're in is called the cullius. And no, it's not empty. You've got company. Traditionally, it included a monkey, a dog, a snake, and a rooster, all shoved in there with you. Why? Honestly. Historians still argue whether it was meant to symbolize disorder or chaos or just to make things unbearably terrifying. Let's break that down. The monkey scratches at your face. The dog is biting anything it can. The snake is pissed. And the rooster, well, it's panicking just like you. Now this whole sack, your awful little zoo, is stitched up, hoisted by a group of scowling men and loaded onto a cart. You're jostled through the streets, the people watching like it's a parade. You're groaning, crying, maybe trying to reason with a monkey. And then, splash, you're dumped into the nearest river, sometimes the Tiber, sometimes the sea. There's a joke somewhere about sinking family drama, but it won't save you. The sack gets heavier with every gulp of water. The animals flail. You can't breathe. You drown not alone, but in a tangle of limbs, fur, and beaks. And no, this wasn't a one-time thing. Rome revived the Pona Culle multiple times across centuries. Even as late as the 3rd century CE, emperors brought it back whenever someone managed to kill dear old dad. Quirky fact, earlier versions of the punishment didn't always involve the full zoo. Sometimes it was just a snake. Later, they upgraded to 4 animals for extra symbolism. Modern scholars still debate whether every animal was always used, or if it varied by location and time. But what's clear, this wasn't about you anymore. It was about the message, about order, about reminding every Roman kid, don't even think about touching dad. Now there's one moment just before the splash where time freezes. The crowd leans in. The sack rocks back and forth. The guard spits over the side. And you're curled like a child in the womb, only this time it's your rebirth into the underworld. In a way, Rome made sure you didn't just die. They made sure your death felt like a ritual, something absurd, something unforgettable, the kind of thing kids whisper about at night. Did you hear? They threw him in a sack with a monkey. So if you're plotting revenge in ancient Rome, maybe, just maybe, skip patricide. Go for tax fraud instead. At least that won't involve poultry. You're limping now. The crowd is gone, the arena a dusty memory. You're chained to a wooden post outside the city gates, barely conscious from your last punishment. You think it's over. You think maybe they'll just fine you and let you crawl home. But no, not in Rome. Because here's a brutal little twist in the Roman playbook. Crucifixion wasn't reserved just for rebels and messiahs. It was handed out to common criminals, slaves, and petty offenders too. And tonight, it's your turn. You thought crucifixion was all about religious figures and revolutionaries. That's how it gets told in Sunday school. But in Rome, it was far more routine and far more humiliating. This punishment was the ultimate slow burn death, not just because it was painful, but because it was deliberate. It wasn't just about killing you, it was about displaying you, making you a billboard for what happens when you step out of line. So here's how this starts. First, you're stripped completely. Modesty, not a Roman priority. Then comes the flogging, usually with a flagrum, a leather whip tipped with sharp bone or metal. It's not just to hurt you, it's to weaken you, to make sure you can't fight back or run away. Historians still debate how much variation existed in this step. Some suggest certain victims weren't flogged at all, depending on their social status. Others say the whipping was so brutal that people sometimes died before they ever reached the cross. But not you, lucky you. You're handed the patibulum, the horizontal beam of the cross. It's heavy. You drag it through the streets stumbling while people hurl insults and stale bread at you. Some laugh, others spit. A few shake their heads like you're already a ghost. Eventually, you arrive at the execution site. Maybe it's on a hill. Maybe it's just outside the city wall. Either way, it's public, always public. That's the point. The vertical post, the stipes, is already in the ground. You're thrown backward, arms stretched, and the guards begin their work. Nails or ropes? That depends. Nails look more dramatic and they last longer in the sun, but ropes are reusable. Romans were surprisingly frugal. Once you're fastened, they lift you up. Your body screams in every joint. You're not high off the ground like in paintings. You're maybe 2-3 feet up, just enough for dogs and flies to reach you, but low enough for people to see the whites of your eyes. And now you wait. Crucifixion didn't kill through bleeding. It killed through exhaustion, asphyxiation, and dehydration. You slowly lose the ability to lift your chest. Your lungs give out. Your legs cramp, and you start to hallucinate. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some crosses included a small wooden support, the sedile, a sort of seat that gave just enough relief to keep the victim alive longer. A twisted Roman courtesy will help you not die, just yet. You hang there for hours, maybe days, buzzing flies, burning skin, bones grinding. Occasionally, the guards walk by and jab you with a spear to check if you're still breathing. Eventually, they'll break your legs to hurry the process. You won't like that part. Or maybe they'll just leave you to rot, vultures pecking, until you slide off in pieces. But even after death, your troubles might not be over. Romans rarely gave crucified bodies a burial. You'd be dumped in a pit, nameless, faceless, gone. Still think crucifixion was a VIP-only punishment? Think again. It was one of the most common public executions during the Roman Empire. Spartacus's rebel followers, 6,000 of them lined the road from Capua to Rome, each one nailed to a cross, left to rot as a warning. And yet Rome didn't see it as cruelty. They saw it as order, a method, a tool in the justice machine. So the next time someone says, "Don't get nailed in Rome," they're probably not talking about carpentry. You're not even a criminal this time. Not really. You're just successful, a little too rich, a little too flashy. You threw one too many banquets, collected a few too many statues, and maybe ticked off the wrong senator by outbidding him for that marble bust of Apollo. Now you're kneeling in a torchlit hall and a man in polished armor is holding a ladle. It's steaming. Behind him, in a bronze pot, something glows like sunlight, molten gold. Tonight's punishment is simple: drink. See, in Rome, wealth was power, but flaunting wealth, that was dangerous. When emperors got jealous or senators got spiteful, you could find yourself accused of avaritia, greed. And what better way to punish greed than with poetic irony? So they force open your mouth, hold your head back, and tilt the ladle. The gold touches your tongue. You expect fire, but it's beyond that. It's not burning, it's obliterating. Your throat seals shut, your organs go rigid, your chest blooms with agony and then collapses under its own heat. You don't even get to scream. Historians still argue whether this was ever actually done or just a juicy legend. Pliny the Elder mentions it, and the Byzantine historians loved the story. But some scholars believe it really did happen, at least once or twice, as a brutal form of exemplary execution. A message wrapped in melted metal. Quirky tidbit: the Parthians, Rome's bitter eastern rivals, also allegedly used this punishment. In one famous tale, they captured a Roman general and gave him the golden cocktail. Sometimes, even enemies shared taste in cruelty. But whether it happened twice or 200 times, the symbolism stuck. To be punished with molten gold was to become a living cautionary tale, a reminder that Rome admired wealth, but only if you knew your place. Later emperors used the story to scare their treasurers. "Careful, or you'll end up like Crassus," they joke, referencing the famously rich Roman who was rumored wrongly to have died that way. For the record, Crassus died in battle, not at a dinner party. Still, the myth persisted. Rome liked the idea of poetic punishment, of turning vice into weapon. You were greedy, then drown in what you craved. And the setting wasn't always a grand hall. Sometimes the execution took place in a back alley, or inside a bathhouse, or during a feast. Guests would suddenly realize they were witnessing a murder and a message. Imagine being there, sipping wine, biting into a fig, and suddenly the host is screaming and the air smells like melted coins. Bon appetit. So here's your lesson if you're going to be rich in ancient Rome. Be humble. or at least pretend to be. Don't gild your sandals or name your villa after yourself. And absolutely, positively, don't outshine the emperor. Or else your next drink might just be your last, and it won't be wine. You're standing in the wings of a Roman theater, sweaty, half-naked, and confused. You were told you'd be part of a play, maybe get a laugh, win some coins, but the guards don't look amused. And that fake sword they gave you, yeah, it's real. Suddenly the curtain lifts. You're shoved forward, the crowd cheers. And now, with torchlight flickering off painted backdrops, it dawns on you, this isn't a performance, it's an execution. Welcome to Punishment by Theater, a twisted Roman mashup of art and death. You're not here to act, you're here to die for real, on stage. Romans loved a good spectacle. Gladiators, old news, beast hunts, yesterday's thrill, but staged mythological deaths with real victims. Now that brought in the crowds. Imagine Orpheus torn apart by Maenads or Prometheus having his liver pecked out. The trick? Use condemned prisoners for the parts and don't bother with stage makeup. Tonight you're playing a character from a famous myth, let's say Hercules during one of his fatal labors. Your costume is a lion's skin, your script is silence, and the climax, you get set on fire. Historians still argue whether these performances were frequent or fringe. Some say they were rare imperial stunts. Others believe they were more common than gladiator fights. What's clear? They were real. Emperor Nero reportedly staged shows where criminals were killed theatrically. One poor soul was burned alive as Hercules. Another was mauled by a bear to reenact a scene from mythology. The logic, if someone going to die anyway, why not make it entertaining? You get execution and drama, and it saves on stage effects. The audience eats it up. They cheer at your screams, laugh at your struggle, and nod approvingly as the story ends with your final twitch. The actor playing the goddess steps forward to offer a benediction. You're still smoldering. Here's the quirky detail. The Romans even debated the artistic merit of these shows. Was it tasteful to kill someone on stage? Did it elevate the myth or cheapen it? Some playwrights insisted it brought realism to drama. Others called it barbaric, as if that was ever a deal breaker for Rome. And the actors, they were professionals except you. You didn't train for this. Your only qualification was being condemned. But the worst part isn't the death. It's that you're not remembered as you. You're remembered as a character. Oh, he was the guy who played Icarus. Never mind the man behind the wings, the one who didn't volunteer. There's something eerie about that. You vanish into the script, your real story smothered by myth. The perfect Roman punishment, erasure by performance. And tomorrow the stage will be cleaned, the props reset. A new victim will be handed a new costume. The audience will laugh again, clap again, and you'll be a footnote in a scroll somewhere, exit, pursued by a bear. Your body aches, not from any single injury, but from accumulated humiliation. You've been dragged through the streets, beaten with rods, branded like livestock, and now you're standing in the midday sun, tied to a wooden frame. People are laughing, pointing. Some are sketching your face, because in Rome, shame was a team sport. This is no public execution. No lions, no cliff diving. This is worse. Survival with scars. Welcome to one of Rome's most humiliating punishments, whipping, branding, and public parading. Let's say you were a slave who tried to escape, or a soldier who deserted. Maybe you just spread some fake gossip about the emperor's new hairstyle. Either way, you've landed yourself in a punishment meant not to kill, but to mark. It starts with flogging, and the Romans didn't hold back. They had options. There was the virga, a light rod, the scutica, a lash, and the flagrum, which we've met before, leather thongs with sharp pieces of bone or metal tied in. That last one was less discipline and more descaning. And it's not behind closed doors. Oh no, it's right in the forum. Everyone's invited. Children clutch street food while watching you scream. Once that's over, time for the branding. A hot iron is pressed into your flesh, often your forehead. The letters fug for fugitivus, runaway, were common for escaped slaves. Others got C for condemned or INF for infamous. You wear your crime for life even if you're later freed. And then comes the parade. You're forced to walk through the streets naked or nearly so, with a placard around your neck listing your crime. It's like an ancient mugshot mixed with Yelp reviews. People jeer. Some throw rotten vegetables. A few bored rich kids might toss coins and make you dance. Quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes used slave collars instead of branding, thick metal bands with inscriptions like, "I have run away, catch me, return me to my master Viventius, you will be rewarded with gold." An early version of lost and found, except you're the item. You might be let go after that, but the shame sticks around. The brand on your forehead is visible at every bathhouse, every market, every wedding you try to sneak into. You're a walking reminder of what not to do. Historians still argue whether this public punishment was more effective than execution. Some say it deterred crime better. Others argue it was more about enforcing class and status, reminding everyone that slaves, the poor, or even slightly uppity citizens had a clear place in the hierarchy. And stepping out of it, well, the iron's still hot. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just wear a hat, Rome's fashion didn't really help you there. Hoods were suspicious. Hats were rare. Plus, you couldn't exactly cover your face every day without someone asking questions. So now you exist in limbo, not imprisoned, not dead, but marked. A living warning sign, a public example. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Rome liked best. You wake up on a rickety wooden boat with no oars, no crew, and no land in sight. Just the ocean, a skin of stale water, and the heavy silence of being forgotten. You've been exiled, not with a farewell or a party, but with a shove and a map that might as well be blank. Welcome to the Roman art of exile to nowhere. No lions, no crosses, no molten gold, just vanishment, the quiet kind that starves you slowly. Exile, exilium in Rome came in flavors. There was relegatio, where you lost your property but kept your life, and deportatio, where both were taken and you were legally considered dead. Either way, Rome was finished with you. They didn't always send you to a known place. Sometimes it was a named island like Pandateria, modern Ventotene, a real favorite for disgraced noblewomen. But other times, you'd just be banished beyond the bounds of Italy, which, considering Rome's size, was like saying good luck in the wilderness. And here's the kicker, Rome didn't transport you there. No government-issued donkey, no chariot with padded seats. You were told to leave, that's it. Guards would watch as you walked out of the city, and then you were on your own. Imagine dragging a satchel full of nothing into the wilderness, begging for directions in villages that spoke a dialect you barely recognized. You didn't just lose your citizenship, you lost your identity. Historians still argue whether some of these exiles were secretly executions, just delayed ones. Many didn't survive. Pirates roamed the coasts. Food was scarce. And if you landed somewhere too nice, well, Rome might change its mind and send someone to fix that. A quirky note, Emperor Tiberius once exiled a poet for making too many saucy jokes about imperial women. The poet begged to be sent to Greece. Instead, he got Thomas, modern-day Constanta in Romania. Ice, wolves, the works, and no punchlines. For the elite, exile wasn't always dusty huts and hunger. Some managed villas, tutors, even local respect. But the catch? They were forbidden to return. If you stepped foot back on Roman soil without permission, you were fair game for immediate execution. Kind of like an invisible fence, but with spears. And the loneliness, that's its own punishment. No letters from home, no legal protections. You became a rumor. Maybe someone in Rome whispered your name at a dinner party, followed by a pause and a quiet, "Didn't he get sent away?" Even worse, you might not deserve it. Exile was often politically motivated. Say the wrong thing in Senate, disagree with the wrong cousin, or simply become too popular, and suddenly you're packing for the edge of the world. Some tried to sneak back, most failed. A few bribed their way into pardon, but even if you returned, Rome never really welcomed you. You were tainted, suspicious, a reminder that anyone could be disappeared if the tides turned. So here you are, drinking rainwater from a cracked bowl, watching the stars over an island you can't pronounce, wondering if anyone back in Rome even remembers your face. Chances are they don't. You shuffle into the market square, shackles clinking around your ankles and something heavy digging into the back of your neck. Not pain exactly, more like presence. A constant metal weight that squeaks when you turn too fast. People are staring again, not because they recognize your face, but because of what's around your throat. Welcome to the next layer of Roman humiliation, punishment by slave collar. See, if you were a slave in ancient Rome, and let's face it, odds were high you were already living on the edge. No legal rights, no family name, and if you stepped out of line, they didn't always beat you. Sometimes they branded you, but sometimes they gave you a collar. Not a soft one, not the decorative kind you'd see on a greyhound. This was iron, thick, unforgiving, and custom-fitted like a prison sentence. Worn tight around your neck day and night. You could feel the weight when you slept, and it clanked every time you nodded your head. And then, just to make things worse, they'd engrave it. Typical inscription, something like, "I have run away, hold me. Return me to my master Viventius and you will be rewarded." A few added threats. Others included addresses or slave registration numbers. It was your identity and your criminal record in a single choking loop of iron. Historians still argue about whether the collars were primarily for escaped slaves or if they also became preemptive tools of control. Some evidence suggests that even slaves who hadn't run might be collared, just in case. Kind of like saying, "We think you might bolt." And the public, they saw the collar and moved on. No one gasped. No one looked away. This was Rome, where everyday life came with a side of cruelty. Here's the quirky detail. Some of these collars were shockingly ornate. Delicate scrollwork, tiny lockets for coins or messages, even decorative clasps, like Rome wanted their dehumanization with a little flair. Some scholars believe a few collars were made intentionally beautiful to reflect on the wealth and style of the owner, not the condition of the wearer. Imagine being reduced to a walking accessory. You didn't take it off ever. If you tried, the damage would be obvious. And punishment for removing a collar, usually death, occasionally something worse, a heavier collar, maybe branded skin to match the one you'd tried to escape. And these weren't hidden in some private garden. You were sent out to work like this, in shops, in temples, on street corners selling olives. Everyone knew what the collar meant. You didn't get questions. You didn't get sympathy. You got silence. But the worst, the collar wasn't just physical. It became psychological. You started walking differently, talking less, lowering your head just enough to avoid the ring scraping your jaw. And every time someone glanced your way, your body flinched just slightly. Eventually, it didn't even hurt anymore. It just was, like weather. And when, or if, you were ever freed, sometimes the collar was taken off in a ceremony. A small mercy, but the skin underneath, always marked. Sometimes literally, other times by the permanent stoop of the shoulders. So next time you see a piece of Roman ironwork in a museum, shaped like a crescent moon or a flattened ring, and you wonder, was that decorative? Remember this. Not everything beautiful in Rome was made for someone free. You're in a courtroom now, not the grand marble kind with senators in togas and carved eagles on every column, but a quieter space, dim and solemn. You can feel every eye on you, but you already know the verdict. You killed your father, and Rome has a very specific plan for that. Yes, we already dipped into Ponaculle, that famously awful sack filled with animals and no exits. But here, we go deeper. Because sometimes that punishment wasn't just a one-size-fits-all. Depending on the time, the crime, or the whim of the magistrate, the execution of a parricide could come with a few upgrades. And lucky you, you're getting the deluxe treatment. After the trial, you're stripped, not just of your clothes, but of your status as a human being. Parricide was seen not only as a crime against family, but against the gods, the state, and the cosmic order of the world. Killing your father in Rome, that wasn't just murder, that was unthinkable. So they make you touch the ground, barefoot. You might even be whipped with blood-stained rods made of blackthorn, the same kind used for symbolic purification. Then they fit you for the cullius, but this version is made of ox leather, sewn shut with massive iron needles. Your hands are tied behind your back. You're gagged. You are, in every legal sense, no longer a person. Now for the animal companions. You remember them, right? The monkey, the dog, the snake, the rooster. It wasn't just chaos, they represented different layers of symbolic punishment. The monkey, a distorted human. The dog, loyalty betrayed. The rooster, a noisy symbol of betrayal. The snake, silent vengeance. Quirky twist. In some cases, the selection of animals varied. Some records mention adding a vulture, others swapped in a weasel. Historians still argue whether this was regional creativity or just Rome being Rome, chaotic even in its rituals. And this isn't done in secret. The sack parade was sometimes as theatrical as a chariot race. You might be marched past temples, past the forum, past the baths where regular citizens lounge with olive oil and gossip, all while you're groaning in a sack, pinned between claws and feathers. Then comes the river. Always a river, usually the Tiber, but anywhere with enough current to carry away the sack and its story. You're loaded onto a cart, rolled to the edge and pushed. No ceremony, no final words, just the splash, the sudden hiss as the sack meets the water and the slow, bubbling silence afterward. The onlookers, they nod, they don't cheer. Parricide is too cursed for applause. This isn't entertainment, it's exorcism. Some Romans believed that simply allowing a parricide's body to touch Roman soil after death would contaminate the city. So the river wasn't just a disposal method. It was a kind of cosmic vacuum cleaner, dragging your cursed soul out to sea. And even after death, you weren't really gone. Your name was scratched off public records, your property seized, your family disgraced. Your descendants, if any, might carry the weight of your sin like a bad smell on parchment. So why revisit this punishment again when we've already seen it earlier? Because this wasn't just one of Rome's weirdest punishments. It was also one of its most ritualized, layered, and terrifyingly theatrical. And the fact that it existed for centuries, occasionally disappearing, then returning like a fever dream, shows just how much Romans feared the idea of a child turning on a parent. It shook them. It touched something ancient and taboo, and so the punishment had to match. You die not just once, but again and again in stories, rumors, court speeches. You become a myth with monkeys and snakes and a leather tomb that drifts into black water. And no one ever carves your name on a stone. You kneel in silence. The crowd is gathered, but no one cheers. No musicians, no wine cellars, no playful children underfoot, just solemn faces and a palpable sense of dread. Even the birds have stopped singing. You're not a criminal, not by Roman standards. You're a Vestal virgin, sworn to 30 years of sacred service, and you broke your vow. And in Rome, that meant one punishment only, being buried alive. The Vestal virgins were Rome's priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Chosen as children from noble families, they were symbols of the city's purity, guardians of the sacred fire, and believed to embody Rome's spiritual health. But there was a catch, one enormous catch: 30 years of absolute chastity. So if you, a Vestal, were caught in an affair, the crime wasn't just personal, it was cosmic. You didn't just dishonor your vow, you endangered Rome itself. Of course, proving such a thing wasn't always straightforward. Historians still argue whether all accused Vestals were actually guilty. Some may have been scapegoats for political convenience. After all, Nothing says, we need to cleanse the city like publicly condemning a divine figure. And because a Vestal's body was sacred, she couldn't be executed in the usual ways. Stabbing her, blasphemy, hanging her. Nope. So they found a loophole burying her alive. It was genius in its cruelty. Technically, they weren't killing you. They were just putting you in a sealed underground chamber with a little food, water, and a tiny oil lamp. The gods would decide what happened next. Spoiler, you die slowly in pitch-dark silence. The procession was a morbid ritual. You'd be veiled, robed in pure white, and led through the forum in a silent parade. No screams, no wailing. You were expected to walk with composure. After all, you were still a priestess. The crowd followed in hushed reverence. A few looked away. Most watched every step. The final destination was the campus Celeratus, the field of wickedness. A special site just outside the city walls, reserved only for this one punishment. There, a tiny room had been dug beneath the ground. It held a couch, a candle, and a little bread and milk, just enough to suggest mercy. You were helped gently down a ladder into the tomb. The ladder was pulled up, the earth was shoveled back, the trapdoor sealed. And that was it. Quirky tidbit. The man assigned to oversee the burial, the Pontifex Maximus, was often said to turn away during the final sealing. Rome needed the ritual to be carried out, but no one really wanted to watch it. Once buried, no one spoke your name again. Your lover, if named, was usually beaten to death. The sacred fire at the Temple of Vesta was rekindled. Life went on. Rome felt cleaner. But the punishment lingered in the air. Even centuries later, Roman historians wrote about it in hushed tones, like they couldn't quite believe it either. And yet, it happened. Not often, but enough that the field of wickedness was never empty for long. Some say the darkness was the worst part. Others say it was the silence. But what broke most Vestals, according to old stories, was the betrayal, not by gods, but by the very city they had vowed to protect. So if you're ever offered a life of prestige in ancient Rome, be careful. Some honors come with invisible chains, and some tombs have doors that only open one way. You're back in the arena now, but not as a gladiator. No sword, no armor, no hope of dramatic combat and roaring approval. This time you're here as a criminal, sentenced to one of Rome's most peculiar and humiliating punishments, damnatio ad bestias, being thrown to the beasts. Now, before your imagination goes full Hollywood, this wasn't always a roaring lion instant death spectacle. Sometimes, sure, lions were involved. But Rome, in its uniquely creative brutality, often reached deeper into the animal kingdom. And tonight, you get the geese. Yes, geese. Hear how it unfolds. You're marched into the arena at midday, when most of the crowd has finished their olives and is getting restless between chariot heats. You're not in chains. You're naked. The sun bakes your skin. A mild breeze brings the scent of sweat, sand, and something musky and feathered from the far side of the gate. And then it creaks open. Out come a flock of geese, honking like tiny brass trumpets. The crowd laughs nervously at first. Then the handlers prod the birds forward. These aren't your grandma's fluffy lake geese. These are trained, furious, biting geese. Imported, overfed, and provoked into a rage most people reserve for losing a bet. They peck, they chase, they leap. And you run, you shriek. You trip over your own foot and land on your backside as 6 beaked nightmares descend on your arms, neck, thighs. Why? Because Rome loved punishment through absurdity. Damnatio ad bestias didn't always mean death. It meant public humiliation. If you survived the pecking geese, the second act might involve a goat, or a leopard on a chain, or a bear with a comically tiny hat. Sometimes the show was more about humiliation than execution. Quirky tidbit. Roman writers describe one event where a man was sewn into a bear costume and then attacked by other costumed prisoners dressed as dogs. The audience thought it was hilarious. Historians still argue whether this was punishment or proto-theater. But for you, this is no comedy. The geese have drawn blood, your legs are bruised, your ego is shredded like parchment in the wind. And the crowd, some jeer, some genuinely laugh, some look away, ashamed of themselves for enjoying it. And then comes the twist. Just when you think it's over, when the handlers drag away the birds and the sand begins to settle, out walks a man in full armor. Not a gladiator, a soldier. He raises his arm. The crowd hushes. You don't get to leave the arena. Because some animals weren't feathered or clawed. Some animals were human, trained killers. And when the crowd demanded more, the line between punishment and execution blurred like blood on sand. He approaches. You stumble backward. Maybe you cry out. Maybe you try to bargain, promise to serve, to confess, to do anything else. It doesn't matter. Because the punishment isn't just about pain, it's about theater. You are a lesson dressed in skin and fear. And as he strikes, the crowd roars, not just for justice, but for the wild, grotesque spectacle that made them feel Roman. In time, damnatio ad bestias would become one of the empire's go-to methods of punishing everything from treason to petty theft. And sometimes the animals won. Sometimes the lions refused to eat. Sometimes the bears wandered off to nap. And those were the days when the crowd booed, not because you survived, but because the show failed. You lie in the dust now, barely breathing. Somewhere, a goose feather drifts down and lands beside you. And that, in its own weird way, might be the most Roman ending of all. You're bound to a post now, shoulders sunburned, head spinning from dehydration. The smell of the sea is just close enough to tease, and the shouts of the crowd echo like surf breaking against the stone. This isn't an arena. It's a theater of execution and today's punishment. Something the Romans called tunica molesta, the troublesome tunic. And yes, it's exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. A man in leather sandals approaches. He's holding a coarse, pitch-soaked tunic, stiff and glistening. He lifts it like a priest with a holy relic, and then, without ceremony, he pulls it over your head. Hot tar scratches your skin as the tunic clings to your chest. Your arms are pinned. Your breathing shortens, and now they're tying you to a pole, tight enough that you can't slump forward, but loose enough that you can still move. Just a little. Then the torchbearer steps forward. You already know how this ends. The tunica molesta was Rome's go-to execution method for arsonists, but it wasn't exclusive. Any crime deemed fiery enough, betrayal, temple desecration, even the wrong kind of political treason, could earn you the flaming tunic. Once it was lit, you didn't just burn. You roasted alive, trapped in your own clothes, dancing a desperate little death dance in front of the city. Quirky tidbit. Some Roman writers claim that executioners would add spicy seasonings, resin, sulfur, even oil, to make the tunic burn longer and smell more dramatic. Historians still argue whether this was true or just ancient exaggeration, but the fact that people believed it tells you everything. The punishment wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Fire to repay fire, a spectacle to burn the memory of your crime into Rome's collective conscience. Nero, in particular, loved it. And while we're on Nero, there's an old story that after the Great Fire of Rome, he used Christians as living torches during his garden parties. They say he'd wrap them in tar-soaked tunics, stake them to the ground, and light them at dusk as music played in the background. Festive. You sway now, your body already sweating beneath the sticky heat of the tar. The torchbearer waits. The crowd is buzzing, as if unsure whether this will be dramatic or disappointing. It's not really about you. You're just the final act before lunch. The torch touches the hem of your tunic, and for a moment it doesn't catch. The crowd sighs. Then whoosh, a low, angry hiss, and suddenly your world is fire. Blistering orange light. Pain like liquid knives across your ribs. You try to scream, but your throat seizes. You twist. You writhe. You black out. You don't survive. No one ever does. And yet the tunica molesta wasn't always used to kill. In some versions, the condemned was made to wear it without being lit, paraded through the forum as a living warning. tar and humiliation as a deterrent. You'd return home with skin raw, pride shredded, and the very real sense that next time, there might not be a next time. Today, your ashes will be swept away before sundown. No inscription, no tomb, just a scorch mark and the faint smell of smoke lingering in the stones. And tomorrow, a new tunic, a new criminal, the same fire. So when you think of Roman punishment, don't just picture gladiators and lions. Picture this, a silent figure bound to a post, cloaked in flame beneath the midday sun. No trial by fire, just fire as the verdict. You awaken in chains, again. But this time, it's not the arena, not a public square, not even the gallows. You're underground, surrounded by thick, unmortared stones and the wet drip of water that seems to echo off into infinity. The air is heavy, stale, and filled with something worse than rot, despair. You're in the Tullianum, Rome's most dreaded prison. But you won't be here long. Because your sentence isn't time, it's death. And not the quick kind. The Romans had many methods of execution, but few carried the dark, claustrophobic weight of what's coming next. Death by strangulation in the Tullianum. A punishment so private, so hidden, it was practically a whispered rumor until you were the one standing ankle-deep in prison muck. It's known also as the carcer. More pit than cell, it sits beneath the Mamertine prison near the Forum. This is where Rome sent enemies of the state, traitors, and high-profile captives they didn't want the public gawking at. Out of sight, out of breath. And tonight it's your turn. You're dragged deeper into the stone-bellied dark. No trial today. Your fate was sealed upstairs by men in crimson-striped togas with too much power and too little sleep. They've declared you hostis publicus, an enemy of the people, which means your death doesn't need applause, just finality. Your captors, slaves, maybe, or bored soldiers don't speak to you. They lower you into a stone chamber through a hole in the floor, then pull the rope back up. You hear it slither away out of reach. You are utterly alone. Except, of course, you're not. You see the shadows of others' bodies, slumped or curled, bones picked clean by rats. And somewhere faintly you hear a whisper. Jugulum, someone once muttered down here. The throat. Because that's how they kill you in the Tullianum. A noose, a garrote, a sudden pressure from behind, not ceremonial, not clean, just final. Quirky tidbit. Legend has it that Rome's enemies, like Jugurtha of Numidia and Vercingetorix, the Gallic rebel, were executed here. After being paraded through the city in triumph, they were led down into this miserable hole and strangled. Unseen, unwept, their corpses left to rot. Historians still argue whether the executions were carried out immediately or whether they were left to starve first, wasting away in the dark until a final hand ended it. Whichever version you believe, the effect is the same. Silence. Oblivion. You're packing now, barefoot on wet stone. The ceiling presses down. You try to sleep, but your ears pick up every tiny sound, scratches, whispers, drips. And then a new sound, footsteps above. You freeze. The iron trapdoor groans open. A rope dangles. You don't struggle, there's no point. One man descends. No uniform, no words, just a pair of arms and a loop of cord. He stands behind you. You try to speak, but your mouth is dry and your voice cracks. The cord slips around your neck. There's a pull sharp practiced. The chamber fades to black. And that's the Roman style. Even in death, even in silence, the punishment is crafted to erase you. No crowd, no tomb, no name carved in marble. Just the stone, the stink, and the dust. They don't want to martyr you. They want to unmake you. And when they climb back up the rope, they take your identity with them. Just another whisper in the pit. You're in the center of the Forum now, standing awkwardly in a wooden cart, wrists bound in front of you, bare feet dusty from the cobblestones. It's hot, but that's not why you're sweating. It's the stares. Hundreds of them, some amused, some disgusted. Most bored. You're about to experience one of ancient Rome's most humiliating punishments, one where pain takes a back seat to shame. This is public degradation, and your particular fate is to be paraded in shame, stripped of your dignity, your social standing, and depending on the crime, your clothes. The Romans were masters of symbolic punishment. Sometimes it wasn't about blood or death. It was about making you a walking, breathing warning sign. And oh, the ways they got creative. If you were a corrupt official, you might be dragged through the streets in tattered purple robes, your once proud insignia smeared with mud, your face blackened with soot. If you were a soldier who had deserted your post, you'd be forced to march between two lines of your fellow troops, each one taking a swing at you. This was called fustuarium. Not fatal, usually, just morale-crushing. But if you were a citizen guilty of something like fraud, adultery, or just generally embarrassing the wrong people, well, then you'd be subject to the infamia parade. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes, instead of being flogged, you'd be paraded around the city wearing a placard listing your crime, tied around your neck like a Roman sandwich board. Thieves, false witnesses, even cheating bakers could find themselves marched through the market square, jeered at by kids and pelted with spoiled produce. Historians still argue whether some of these humiliations were state-sanctioned or spontaneous mob justice. The line between official and unofficial punishment often blurred, especially when the target was unpopular. Today, your crime: you insulted a powerful magistrate in a tavern, loudly, while drunk, and now you're paying for it with your reputation. You shift in the cart as the wheels jolt over uneven stone. A slave follows behind you, rhythmically slapping a stick against a drum, drawing attention to your shame like some tragic parade master. Someone shouts your name. Another throws a fig at your head. The worst part, the silence. The people who knew you, looked up to you, shared wine with you. They don't say a word. They just look away. Reputation in Rome wasn't just social currency. It was legal standing. Once you'd been formally humiliated, especially through punishments like infamia, you lost certain civic rights. You couldn't vote, couldn't testify in court, couldn't even serve in the military. You were still alive, but politically, socially, you were a ghost. And if you were a woman, the punishment could be even more layered. A disgraced Vestal virgin, for instance, might be paraded silently before being buried alive. An adulteress might have her hair shaved and be marched through the streets in rags. Your body became the message. Eventually, the cart stops. You're untied and pushed out into the square. Someone hands you a spade. Wait, what? You're ordered to fill in a small trench. It's not punishment, really. It's just busy work, but in front of everyone. A final indignity, the Roman version of scrubbing the latrines. And when you're done, no one claps, no one speaks. The crowd just disperses like mist. You're free to go. Except you're not. Not really. Your sentence is over, but your shame follows you. The man who mocked a magistrate is now the man who dug a ditch in front of half the forum wearing a tunic too small and a turnip in his hair. Your name is a joke now. And Rome remembers its jokes. So when people talk about Rome's punishments, they often think lions, fire, crucifixion. But sometimes the cruelest thing isn't death, it's living as a punchline. You're on a boat now, or rather, what's left of one. A narrow wooden plank. The Tiber glints beneath you, lazy and greenish-brown, dragging the late afternoon light like it's in no hurry to reach the sea. And neither are you. Because where you're going, there's no coming back. This is pona culle, the punishment for parricide, the killing of one's own parent, and it is easily one of ancient Rome's most surreal, theatrical, and deeply bizarre execution rituals. And guess what? You're the guest of dishonor. They've already stitched you into a rough leather sack, but you're not alone inside. No, the Romans had a flair for symbolism, and they believed that killing your parent was a cosmic crime, something that unbalanced the entire moral order of the universe. So you had to be erased in a way that matched the offense. So they put you in with company, A dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. Yes, really. Each animal supposedly represented a different aspect of betrayal or chaos, though historians still argue about what each one symbolized, or even whether this exact combination was used every time. Some sources list different creatures. Some wonder if this was ever actually carried out, or if it was just a dramatic legal threat. Still, the Roman legal texts are crystal clear. Commit parricide, and into the sack you go, with your squirming, scratching, snarling roommates. The sack is drawn tight. The light disappears. The air is warm, close, thick with animal panic. The monkey claws at your legs. The snake gods help you brushes across your arm. The rooster flaps wildly, wings beating your face. The dog is growling, trapped like you, in a panic it can't understand. And then, splash, you're hurled into the river. The sack sinks slowly, heavy with bodies and chaos. You thrash, the animals thrash, and somewhere in that blind, wet darkness, everything blurs. Your final seconds are soundtracked by frantic screeches and muffled growls. Water seeps in. Breath runs out. Silence falls. Ponacule was designed to strip you of everything. Not just your life, but your very place in the human order. You didn't deserve the dignity of dying alone or even being mourned. You were an offense to nature, so nature swallowed you whole. The Romans didn't apply this punishment lightly. It was rare, but its rarity made it infamous, whispered about with horror at dinner parties, warned of in courts, like a myth made real. Quirky historical tidbit. At one point, when the practice faded in Rome proper, Byzantine emperors briefly revived it, adapting it with local animals and different sacks. In one bizarre 3rd century case, the condemned man was sewn in with a wildcat instead of a monkey. Spoiler, it did not end well. You may be wondering, why not just crucify a parricide or throw them to the lions? Rome had no shortage of brutal options, but this one was special. Ponacule was about cosmic justice. You weren't just a criminal, you were an abomination. You didn't get to bleed in the dust of the arena. You got packed like cargo and tossed into the underworld's waiting current. And the river, like Rome, rolled on without you. Now take a breath. Let the water still. The animals go silent. The sack unravels in the current of memory, and the sky fades from imperial purple to soft twilight gray. You're no longer in the river, no longer in chains or sacks or surrounded by wild beasts, just lying in bed, as still and warm as a candle's flicker. The echoes of Rome's strangest punishments are fading now, like distant drums across a vanished empire. Let your breath slow. Let your limbs sink deeper into the mattress, your thoughts growing drowsier with each passing second. History can be brutal, even absurd, but it's always human. The same need for order, for justice, for revenge, or for a laugh at someone else's expense. Rome wielded punishment like performance art, equal parts spectacle and sentence. From crocodile dung facials to snake-stuffed sacks, it wasn't just law, it was theater. But that world is gone now. No more tribunals, no more itchy tunics or mob jeers. Just you, in a quiet room, the hum of night beginning to settle into the walls. The only judgment here is how long until sleep finally wraps around you. You've walked through Rome's strangest dungeons, courts, and forums. You've heard the drumbeats, the gavel cracks, the animal cries in the dark. But those sounds are distant now, blurred like ancient graffiti fading from a sunlit wall. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the noise of the past dissolve into hush. And if you dream tonight, maybe it'll be of marble columns and empty amphitheaters, long since crumbled, and of a Rome that no longer punishes, but simply sleeps. Good night. Sweet dreams.